Regardless of how well you've blocked out a piece of animation, there are almost always surprises when switching curves from stepped to spline. For beginners, this can be extremely difficult, since a piece of animation which appeared to be working well can quickly turn into a mess. In this lesson, you'll see how I avoid floaty results, and you can watch every step that I take in real time as I turn my blocking into a final piece of polished animation. Hello, I'm John Knowles, and this lesson is part of my Intermotion course, which teaches the foundations of character animation within Blender. The entire course will be available for free on YouTube, and if you'd like to make use of the demo files and rigs as you follow along, they're also available for free using the link in the description. If you've been following along, in the last lesson I blocked out this piece of animation. Having created the main poses, we timed things out to create a sense of variety and rhythm to the motion, but we still have a few things to do before we have a finished piece of animation. So if I select all of my controls here on my character, you can see that we have some long pauses here that we've introduced before we start to then move our character. The problem is this looks good at the moment in the blocking because we're holding this pose before we then bend down. But if I were to change the interpolation here by selecting everything and hitting T and change it to Bezier, you'll notice that our character now slowly moves down into this next pose. And we'll end up with a very drifty, swimmy result if we're not defining exactly how long these movements need to take. So I'm just going to undo that. And what we want to do is define how long this motion is going to take to move down and look over the edge. So I actually only want this to be a few frames. So what I want to do is introduce a moving hold here. So we have our character move up into this position here, and we want to hold that to about frame 61. So for now, I'm going to hit I to insert a keyframe there on frame 61. But what I don't want is for these two poses to be identical, because that means the character will stay rigidly locked in place, which will look quite unnatural. So instead what I can do is go back to frame 47, and with everything selected, we can use the breakdown tool to add an ease in to that final pose. What we can do is hit Shift E, and we can move towards our next pose and just back off just a little bit, maybe around 90%. Now, as we move up into place, we hit almost our full pose, but we'll keep moving into that final position. We then have a quick look down over the edge, but we don't want this to drift straight back up again. So we need to do the same thing here. We need to define how fast these moves are going to be. So again, I want to select everything, introduce a keyframe here on frame 71 for this hold, and we're just going to back off frame 65 just a little bit. So again, Shift E and around 90% there. So we're looking down, we keep looking down to frame 71, then we'll lift the head back up again. And we need to hold it up there before we anticipate down for our turn. So again, I'm going to introduce a keyframe here on frame 80, come back to 75, and let's move up into that position. Now I don't generally want everything to feel like we're just moving from one pose to the other, so we will introduce a little bit of overlapping action later. But for now, this will better hold our key poses and clearly define the timing of our moves. So we dip down as we're turning to look one way, and we want to hold that till around frame 94. So let's insert a keyframe there. And 86, let's use that breakdown tool. So we can ease into that position before we move down and look across in the other direction. Which will hold maybe frame 108. And back on frame 101, let's once again add a bit of an ease in. Turn back into looking dead ahead before our anticipation down. So at this point, I'm going to introduce another keyframe, but I think what I'm going to do, instead of just easing into this pose, I'm going to go through that pose and just a bit beyond, so we're starting to anticipate upwards before we anticipate down. Now for our anticipation down, I think we can move that frame 124 on a bit, so let's move that to 125, so we just have 3 frames to move down, but we're going to hold that, and we want a really fast push off, so I'm going to hold that all the way to frame 136. Again, back on frame 128, I'm just going to again use that breakdown tool, go to 90ish%, so we move most of the way down into that anticipation, and continue to squash into position before we have this fast takeoff. Now looking at that takeoff, it feels like we're going to move higher than we actually are at the moment. So what I'm going to do is just select this pose here at frame 140, G and Z twice, and just move this a bit higher. And back on frame 137, I'm going to adjust this pose slightly, just to tilt ourselves down in the direction of travel a bit more. So it really feels like we're jumping up towards that next pose. And as we come down to frame 144, I'm going to stretch this a little bit further as well, because we're really going to be coming down fast at that point into that squash and jump out. Okay, so hopefully we should now be in a far better position to select all of our keyframes and move to a Bezier interpolation. So I'm going to hit A to select all of my keyframes down here within the dope sheet. I'm going to hit T and switch that to Bezier. And then we'll play this back and see what we've got. So that's not looking too bad. We've lost a little bit of the snappiness that we had within the blocking pass, but that's quite normal at this stage. As we add in those in-betweens on ones, things can start to look a little bit softer. But by adding in those moving holds before we switch to Bezier interpolation has really helped to maintain the overall timing. We do need to look at some of our in-betweens, obviously. For example, here as we're jumping, we have some very strange poses that the computer's creating, which really need some refinement. And we'll have a look at our spacing on things like the jumps to make sure that we're really retaining that snappiness that we want and things aren't looking too mushy. So the first thing we're going to do is just select this foot control here and start to look at its spacing. And we're going to switch the graph editor to do that. So I'm just going to hit Control Tab over the dope sheet and just drag this window up a little bit so we have a bit more space to work with. So over on the left here, I'm just going to hit the plus key on my numpad to roll this out. And I'm going to select my Y location curve and hit the home key to frame that up. So we can see here our initial jumps are defined here with our Y location. And just like the bouncing ball, we want to adjust the shape of these curves so that we're moving up quickly, we're slowing through the top, and then we're accelerating down until we hit the ground. We don't want this sense that the curve is slowing in or slowing out here at the start. So we can just select this keyframe, hit V for our handle type, and change it to free, and then adjust this up so that you can see that our foot is taking off far more quickly now. Stays up in the air, and we want to do the same on the other side. Hit that V key, change it to free, and again adjust this handle to create this nice shape that we're familiar with from the bouncing ball. So we'll hold that foot up in the air for a lot longer and come in a lot faster. We want to do the same on the other side here as well. And I'm just going to move my way down the timeline, adjusting the shape this curve as I go. So again here, just with this little hop, still want to get that same curve shape in here. And for now, I'm going to leave this section of it alone as we're sliding along the floor. We can refine that later if necessary. And I'm going to move along to this jump at the end. So once again, as we take off, we need to be moving off quickly. So let's adjust that shape there. And again, as we come into land, you can see that's really breaking things here, but that's because we haven't done the same thing with the cap yet. And I'm just going to adjust this handle to create a nicer shape to this curve, so that we're holding up in the air for a bit longer and coming down rapidly into the contact before we bounce out again. So let's adjust this jump here on the other side. And this is where I think we can probably adjust our timing and move this back a bit. So I'm just going to hit Control Tab to go back to my dope sheet, hit A to select all of my controls, and the right square brackets key just to pull this back a frame. This is where I introduce that extra little bit of timing just for our blocking stage, but I really don't think we need it. So that looks a little bit better there. So I'm going to reselect my foot, jump back into the graph editor just to select this final keyframe here and adjust the shape of that curve for the foot. So I'm going to do the same now for the cap control. So again, selecting that Y location curve. Let's adjust all of these handles here. And in this case, because we're actually squashing the cap down again, we actually have a nicer shape to this curve already. So what I might do is just adjust this up a little bit here, and I'm not going to break that handle. So we keep the cap up, it comes down, but once the foot has contacted the ground, the cap compresses into this position before coming up and out. So we actually have a much nicer shape going on here already by default. So just hold that up a little bit there. Again, through this little jump is fine. And then I really want to pay attention to this last section here. So at this point we really will want to adjust our curve quite a bit. So I'm going to break that handle and adjust that up a little bit. On the other side, let's drag this handle out. So we definitely want this cap to be held up in the air more. So let's break that handle and pull this back up. Just checking what's going on up here in the camera view as I'm adjusting things down in the graph editor to make sure we're getting the right result. So I really think on this position, because we're coming down so fast and we don't really squash that much, I think I'm going to lift this a little bit higher. So we're really stretched at this point, so we get a bit more shape change as we come into that squash pose. And in fact, I think I'm going to compress the timing here. So I'm going to select everything again, jump back to my dope sheet, and I just want a single frame in here. So let's select everything from 146 onwards and just move it back a frame. So we contact with that stretch position and we're straight into the squash there. before we start to come back up again. And I think I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, just a single frame, because we're moving so quickly down. There we are. So I'm going to select that cap again, jump back into my dope sheet, and reselect that Y location curve. So you can see now this makes a little bit more sense as it's coming in here, and then we just need, once again, for that cap to be springing back up again into that top position of the jump. Just going to move that a little bit higher. And then I'll adjust this last bit as well, even though that's currently out of the camera frame. Okay, so we still have some strange shapes in here with the foot, which we'll resolve as well in a minute. But I just want to see how that's looking now that we've adjusted the spacing on those jumps. So that's not looking too bad, but I think the jump down is looking a bit too fast at the moment. So I'm going to hit A to select everything, jump back to my dope sheet, and let's have a look at things. So I think let's introduce another frame here as we're dropping down. And I think we could do the same here on the other side. Let's see what that looks like. So I think that feels a bit more relaxed now. Sometimes an extra frame is literally all you need to make a big change to the finished result. Now the other obvious problem that we have here is this slide into place, which feels like we slide rapidly, slow, and then have another little shuffle forward. So we need to look at the spacing there as we're sliding into place. So I'm going to select my foot control and head into the graph editor. And if we take a look at our location curves, we should be able to find out what's going wrong. So we have both our X and our Z location curves to consider here, because we're moving diagonally across. And we can see that there's lumps and bumps in this curve, which we're not really wanting. So at the moment, we have the character moving forwards rapidly, and then they're slowing down into this position where they contact. They move rapidly into this position before slowing down and then accelerating off again. So this curve needs to feel like it's actually faster at the start and slowing down into this final position. So we need to do some adjustment. And what I think I'd like to do is actually try and adjust both my cap and my foot at the same time, since they'll have the same translation on them. So I'm going to select both controls here, and you can see that we can select both our Z location curves just by holding down control and clicking on both of them together. And you can see how these curves are very similar to each other. So now I can select these two keyframes here and just hit the G key and move them up a little bit so that we are now easing into this final position. And then if I have a look at the hop here, jump up and down, I think I'm going to move this a little bit further forwards as well. And I'm going to select both of these and move them up. So I really want to sense that we're going faster at the start and we're easing in towards the end. So I'm going to do the same now with my X location curves. I'm going to select both of them and have a look at what's going on, because we have the same problem there on the X curves. So what I might do is just select these ones and actually pull them back a little bit, so that will create a better shape there. I'm going to nudge these ones up a bit. we've got a better shape to that curve. So that feels a lot better with that slide into place. We no longer have the interruptions in the middle of it. So with those main spacing problems figured out, I think we can have a look at some of the other obvious issues, like the shape of the stalk. So I'm going to select my foot control here, and I'm just going to jump back to my dope sheet for now. And if I scrub through the timeline, we can have a look at where we're seeing some problems. So at the moment here, as we're moving in towards the ground, we've already got this flat foot here because we have it flat for the contact. So I'm going to move back to frame 7 and just adjust the shape of it here. And what I might do is adjust my cap shape as well. Just tilt that back a little bit further. So that's looking a bit better through that section of the jump. Then as we take off, we want to do the same sort of thing as well. So that's looking okay on frame 10, but up by frame 11 we have this sort of S shape here that we don't really want. So I'm just going to rotate that back down a little bit. And we can rotate it to one side, which will create a nicer rounded shape to the bottom of the foot there. We're going to do the same on the other side as we come in towards the ground here. Now on frame 16, we're not actually on the ground, but we do have this slightly wobbly shape already within our main pose. So I'm just going to rotate this on the Z-axis a bit, just create a better shape there from the camera view. And then on frame 15, I'm going to adjust that a little bit as well. I'm actually going to nudge that sideways too. In fact, I'm going to move it up slightly within my camera view. So it will create a better arc as we come over and down into that contact. Now, frame 20, I think I'm just going to adjust the shape of the stalk a little bit here. But back on frame 19, I definitely still want to tilt that foot back a bit. Now we're landing flat here on frame 23. I think this is somewhere that we could actually land in heel first a little bit. So I'm going to tilt this back and move it up a touch. So we're not fully contacting the ground. We're actually sliding that into place as we come forwards into frame 27. It will help that sense that we are skidding into place. And then we want to have a look at things as we're jumping off. So already on frame 137 where we take off, I'm not very happy with the shape that we've got there. So I think I'm going to tilt this foot forwards and lift it up. And then we can actually lift the cap up a bit as well. So we're creating a nicer shape to start with as we take off. I'm going to lift that just a little bit further and tilt that cap a bit more. I want a bit more of a curve to my shape here. So that's a little bit better. I'm going to adjust my cap shape a bit here as well. So I can rotate this squash control just to adjust the shape of that cap, make it look a bit more interesting. And feel like it's stretching in the direction of travel a bit more. So now frame 141, I think I'm going to tilt that foot back a little bit. But we still need to have a look at what's going on earlier on in the jump, so I definitely want to rotate that foot there on frame 138. And I think I also want to adjust my cap here and tilt that back a little bit more. And I'm going to recover the shape of this a bit faster too. So I'm just going to hit Alt and G to reset that squash control. Then we definitely need to do something as we're coming down here as well. So I think here on frame 144, what I'm going to do is rotate this back. I'm also going to just lift this foot up a little bit more, just to maintain this shape for a little bit longer so we're not stretching too soon. And then it will feel like we're stretching more as we come in towards the landing. I'm scrubbing through here just to look at the arc that we're forming as we jump. Now frame 145, I'm just going to adjust that position on the foot a little bit. Make it feel like we're really going straight down towards that contact point. And again, here on frame 144, I'm going to tilt that cap back a bit as well. So I think that's looking a bit better through that jump. And then we definitely need to adjust things here on the takeoff as we're exiting. I think on frame 151, I'm just going to adjust my shape a bit here to help with the previous frames. We still need to tweak that foot shape quite a bit. That's a bit better. So let's play things back and see what we've got. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. But I think there's a couple of places that we can push things just to improve the animation a little bit more. And first of all, I want to have a look at this moment where the character looks down. Now, at the moment I'm feeling that's a little bit rushed. The character looks down and straight back up again. And I like to hold on that pose where we're looking down for a little bit longer, so we get a better impression that the character might be thinking about things. So I'm going to hit A to select all of my controls on my character. So we have this look down currently from frame 61 to 65, and we're holding it to frame 71 before looking back up again. So I think I'm going to select everything from frame 71 onwards. I'm going to add in maybe 3 frames to that. But I'm also going to move back to frame 65 and move that back a frame, so that we have a faster move down and we hold it for longer before we look back up again. Let's see what that looks like. So I think that's working a bit better. We have a longer pause there, and then we have a bit of variety in the timing when we're looking around before we decide to anticipate down and jump out. But that moment where we anticipate down, I think we could push that a bit further as well. So I think the initial move down is fine, but I'd like to really squash down a bit further as we come into frame 139, so it feels that we are building up a lot more energy for that jump out. And what I might actually do is just keep my existing move in and up to frame 128, and then add in another little micro anticipation up before we squash down. So I'm just going to move this on a frame here, And I'm going to duplicate my frame 128 to frame 130 and just move this up a bit, rotate the head back a bit. And then frame 139. I'm just going to squash this down a bit further, tilt that head right down. So we have more of a squash into place. So the little quick move up and down just gives it a little bit more pop to that motion. And we have more of a squash into place there. And I think what I'm going to do is just hit A to select everything and then go to frame 135, and I'm just going to ease into this final position a bit more. So I'm just going to hit Shift E and move this on to something like 85%. And then that will squash us faster into that final position with just a little bit of a moving hold at the end before we then pop up and out. Now I do feel that foot is trailing a bit too much there, so it doesn't feel like we've got that sort of straight push off that you'd expect at this point. So I want to have a little look at what's going on there. Now we're obviously moving sideways at this point, so I'm just going to have a look at my foot in the graph editor. So I want to have a look at my X and Z location and see what's going on this jump. So at the moment they're not moving that fast at all, and then we accelerate off here. So I think I'm going to just have a look at my cap as well. So I'm going to select both of them together, X and Z location on both of the cap and the foot. So you can see we have quite a difference here in our Z location curves. So if I select these ones and move them up, notice how it's bringing the foot closer to the cap there. And let's do the same with the X curves for the whole character. So I think then I'm going to rotate this foot control back a little bit, so it's pointing more in the direction it's come from. And I think that's going to work a little bit better. But I think I'm going to just adjust this cap control down a little bit. I'll frame 140 as well. So I'm just going to hit Shift and left arrow key to jump back to my first frame and press spacebar to play this through. There we are, and I think I'm happy with that final result. So the final thing that we haven't discussed yet is actually exporting your animation. Typically when you're working on a production, you're not going to be rendering out every single shot as you work on it. Instead, you'll need to save out preview versions of your animation in order to receive feedback. Now to do that, we actually start out in the same way as if we are rendering out our animation. So we need to head over to our Output tab here. And here within the Output section, we can pick a folder to save your work into and create a file name. I'm just going to call this Toadstool Jump and press Accept. Now by default this will save out an image sequence, which is great if you're rendering, but when we're creating a simple preview, we can actually work with a movie file. So I'm going to select FFmpeg video, and then under the encoding section, I'm going to change this to MPEG-4. And I'm just going to increase my output quality to high quality. Obviously double check that you're using the correct frame rate here, which is 24 frames per second, and that your frame start and end frames are correct as well. Once you're done with that, rather than heading up to the render menu, instead we want to go to the viewport menus. And here under the view menu, we have the option for viewport render animation. And we want to do this on our camera viewport. Once you do that, it will go ahead and render out a preview of your animation. You can close that down again, and then under the render menu, you can choose view animation. This will open Blender's built-in animation player, which allows you to view your animation, or you can scrub through it by just dragging left and right on the player. And within your file system, you should also have this MP4 file saved out, which you can then open in any other native player. For this lesson's exercise, I'd like you to take the blocking that you created in the last lesson and turn it into a final polished piece of animation. As you've seen during this lesson, one of the most important stages is defining any moving holds before switching to spline to help avoid a floaty end result. After that, it's simply a case of taking your time to work through your animation whilst thinking about how to apply the animation principles to refine the final result. Have fun, and I'll see you in the next lesson.